Magnus, the strongest in the world, played a game against Gukesh, the world champion. And everyone was like, okay, who is the actual GOAT? And Gukesh actually won that game, and Magnus slams the table. I'm sure you guys knew what happened. So everyone was like, Gukesh is the new GOAT, let's go. But then Magnus actually won the tournament. So they were like, okay, Magnus is the GOAT, minor setback. So that settled it. However, yesterday they played another game and I have it to show to you. Let's go. So Magnus started off with c4, e5, knight c3, bishop to b4. Now, Magnus is a very good strategic player, and he knows that he's better than Gukesh strategically. That's what he thinks. So he wants to play these slow positions where he outplays Gukesh. He does not want to go into these crazy lines. So he developed his knight, and then Gukesh took on c3. And I'm so glad that I'm just so excited about this video because I'm about to end the debate of are bishops better than knights. Gukesh moved his bishop to b4, Magnus is developing his pieces, and Gukesh took on c3, moving the same piece more than once and giving up his bishop for a knight. So Magnus took, pawn d6, guards the pawn to e4, and then knight to d7. Now, the game has not started as yet. Bishop to d3 was played, and I want you guys to look on the position. Magnus has the bishop here. Are bishops better than knights? The bishop on d3 is blocked in by its own pawns. Knight to c5 was played. Gukesh moved the knight, the same piece, more than once in the opening stage of the game, and Magnus decided to keep that bishop, the same bishop that is blocked in by the same pawns. He kept it. Now, Gukesh played knight to f6, developing the knight, attacking the pawn on e4. Magnus guards it, and then a5 was played because Gukesh does not want Magnus to play this b4 move and chase away the knight. So Magnus played knight to d2. Like the guy has a bishop on c1 that needs to be developed. The guy's king is in the center of the board. But what did Magnus do? Knight to d2. He wants to play a slow game. Magnus is not castling his king. I repeat, Magnus is not castling his king. What did Gukesh do? Gukesh played g6. Gukesh didn't even castle his king. And why would you play g6 if you do not have a dark squared bishop? The guy doesn't have a dark squared bishop, and then he plays pawn g6, which means pawn g6 weakens the dark squares. Magnus played knight to f1. He wants to maneuver the knight. Gukesh plays bishop e6, developing his pieces. This is where the game begins. Now, after bishop to g5, why did Magnus play bishop g5 though? Knowing that it can be chased away with h6. Like Andy has the bishop here. So what did Gukesh do here? He chased away the bishop. And did Magnus just take on f6, castle his king, play a normal regular game? The guy pull his bishop back to h4. The guy saying, I am not going to allow a knight to capture my bishop. And then Gukesh played g5. Now, Gukesh is not castling. Magnus is not castling. The bishop went back to g3. Now, I want you guys to look on this. This bishop is blocked in by its own pawn, so you wouldn't really say it's a very active bishop. This bishop is pointing towards black's pawn chain. So where's this bishop going? I want you guys to keep an eye on the evaluation bar. Queen to d7 was played, regular moves, connecting the rooks, and then Magnus played f3. So I guess he notices that this bishop is not doing anything, and he needs to ensure that his bishop goes on a long diagonal. Now, Gukesh plays knight to h5. Again, Magnus can simply play knight e3, get his knight off the background, get the king off the center of the board, and play some normal chess. What did Mr. Carlson do here? The guy, well, he did play knight e3. It's not here. Yeah, knight f4. So I thought he played bishop to f2 in this position. But, well, it looks like he was willing to give up the bishop then. So he was willing to give up the bishop there. Queen to d2 was played. The queen is under attack. He still did not take the knight. It's weird. So Gukesh has the chance to take here. But he didn't take because this rook gets an open file. Now, after knight f4, queen e2, Gukesh played b. This was like the first move where the commentators were like, yo, is he really going to find b5? Because I want you guys to keep in mind, whenever we have the bishops, it's usually very important that we open the position. And the player who is playing with the knights want to keep the position closed. Why is Gukesh trying to open the position? Just a hint, just a little hint. Why is Gukesh trying to open the position and he has the two knights? So Magnus played knight to d5. He did not take. I mean, if takes, the queen takes, b2 is hanging, the knight is going to b3, this rook is coming here. Like, that's too much drama. So he plays knight to d5, and black is not able to take here because of this fork. So what did the world champion do in this position? He played bishop takes d8. Now, well, bishop takes d5. The best move in this position is actually king d8, but nobody was expecting Gukesh to find king d8 there. I mean, it's just a computer move. Like, I don't even know why king d8 makes some sense. Like, the computer does not want him to give up the bishop, but the world champion gave up the bishop. And then after Magnus took here, Magnus has two bishops versus Gukesh's two knights. And then what did that do? Knight back to a5. Like, this was Gukesh's first mistake. Like, we were talking about, well, me saying we, the commentators, were talking about moves like immediate b4, or like just to immediately open the position, like b4, takes, queen takes, king e7, swing the rook over to b8. And, because of the amount of time that is on the clock, this was a rapid game. This would have given black a lot of chances because black's pieces are just so active. But this did not happen, and he pulled his knight back to a5. This was like, why is he backing down? And then Magnus was like, it was here where Magnus pulled the bishop back to f2. So he pulls the bishop back to f2. He was like, I have two bishops, you have two knights. My bishops are better than the knights. Now, at this point in the evaluation bar, it's a +1 advantage for Magnus, and Gukesh decided to play king to f8. It's like, I need to teach these guys how to like castle their king, because it's crazy at this level. Magnus is not castling the king. Maybe it was a slip. The guy didn't castle. The guy played king to g8 instead of castling the king. And then now you may expect Magnus to play a move like castle on the queen side, castle on the king side. Guy played g3. And this move, by the way, excellent move, because when we're playing against knights, it's very important that we keep the knights off the center of the board, and we want to open the position. So Magnus playing g3 here is like, okay, this knight is not coming in the game anymore. So Gukesh played king to g7. He's trying to get his rook in the game. So bishop e3, queen e7, and then rook to g1. This was where a lot of class was being shown, because they were already thinking, why not just play h4 and do a pawn break, open up the position? But that's actually a mistake, because after knight takes, if rook g1, there is pawn takes. And I'm not saying white is losing here, but white has to find rook h3, and then after pawn takes, queen h2, hit this. And again, like, if the knights are not able to stay on like an outpost or just to stay somewhere stable, then the knights just won't be better than the bishop. So Magnus actually decided to play rook to g1 first, and then all Magnus Carlsen needs to do now is to prepare h4. So knight back to f6 was played in this position, and then Magnus played b4. This was another highlight of the game. The guy just needed to play h4, open up the position, and he has an advantage, but I guess he just wants to slowly outplay Gukesh. So he decided to play b4, and now he's just giving black chances. After takes, look at this. Why would you open up the guy's rook like this? And then after pawn takes, the knight goes to a4. So basically what Magnus' idea is here is, if you have the bishop here, you keep the knights away from the center of the board. You're trying to go for some pawn breaks. But first of all, why this pawn break if the guy's king is here? And your king is still in the center of the board, sir. But keep watching. Look at this. Magnus decided to play bishop to d3. He is applying a lot of pressure to this pawn, and then this was like this move. Nobody was expecting Gukesh to find this. I want you guys to keep in mind, Magnus excels in those positions, especially against Gukesh, where he slowly outplay people. Gukesh, Gukesh wants to find his own thing. So Gukesh plays c6. Like, I don't know how this was not a brilliant move, but keep in mind, if you have the knights, you do not go for pawn breaks. So why is Gukesh trying to open the center? Because Magnus' king is in the center of the board. The king is in the center, open the center. c6, it looks like a free pawn. Magnus just took the free pawn. Here you would think Gukesh is going to be like, okay, let me just go rook c8, win back my pawn. My pawn on b5 is hanging. Gukesh played d5. He is sacrificing material to open the center of the board. That was a great move, by the way. And then after Magnus took on d5, he took on d5. Now, Gukesh, who has the knights, is trying to open the position. Like, that's not how it works. It's the player who has the bishop who is supposed to open the position. So Magnus played a3. Now he was like, okay, my pawn here is under attack. I have to defend the pawn. And then Gukesh swing his rook over on d8. Now, look on the difference now. Why did Magnus play rook to g1 if he's not going to play h4? Look on Magnus' king. He can't castle over there anymore. definitely can't castle on the queen side. What is he going to do? So he plays rook to c1. He wants to hold on to this pawn that he has now. This was like, the position is still equal, by the way. But if you just look on the position, imagine if you're playing with Magnus here and, well, and you're playing with the white pieces. How would you play if your king is in the center of the board? Gukesh plays rook to d6, and the computer says this was an inaccuracy. They prefer queen to c7, but nobody liked queen to c7. So he played rook to d6, and then Magnus played another mistake. Magnus is like, if you're going to attack me, I'm going to take as much material as possible. And Gukesh decided to play knight c3. He found the move. Now, I played something against Hikaru like this where I made a mistake. The rook was on the same line as my queen, and I did not move my queen out the way. Magnus decided to take the pawn and allow this discovered attack on his queen. Knight c3 was played. Now the queen is under attack. Where did Magnus move the queen? I didn't move the queen. I played bishop to c5. It's a crazy game. And then at this point in the game, they were both like in time pressure. So Magnus was like so calm, and then he started to look like this. And then, Gukesh always does this thing where he does this and look on. It was crazy. So knight takes b5 was played. So Gukesh did not take the queen because if we take the queen, we're just going to take here. So he took here. And then after Magnus took the rook, he took back on d6. And this is now like another concept. It's like, are two minor pieces better than a rook? So now Gukesh has the two knights, Magnus has the rook, but what is the rook doing on g1? Like, if Magnus could just move his king to h1, then that would be good. But what is the rook doing on g1 and what is the king doing on e1? King to f2 was played. He's not trying to get his rook in the game and get his king out of the game finally, but Gukesh is ready to start his attack. He pulls his knight back. A3 is now hanging. Knight is going to the c4 square. And because the rook is behind the pass pawn, Magnus wants to push it up the board. So Gukesh is saying, once something on c4, that going anywhere. So queen to d3 was played. Magnus again plays another defensive move. And then Gukesh plays queen to e6. Now, the queen is going to h3. We're keeping an eye on the c4 square. Magnus played another mistake, rook to c4. And if you guys were watching the game live, you could see like and the hand signals that Magnus was doing. Like it was crazy. Gukesh played e4. This was another critical point in the game. It's crazy. The guy's just opening the position, pawn to e4, because and the reason why rook to c4 5 was a mistake. E4 before didn't really work because there's this queen to d4 move. So for example, no queen to d4 doesn't really make much sense, even though the knight on b6 is unprotected. So he still gave the check. Gukesh just moves the king. And then he plays rook to d1. Magnus Carlsen made another mistake. Is this the end of the Magnus Carlsen era? And is it now Gukesh? I don't know. Like, pawn takes pawn. Look at this. The king is now just exposed. Magnus played rook to e5. Another blunder. And then this was where Gukesh was like, you know that thing that Gukesh does? And Magnus actually had like seconds on the clock. Gukesh was chilling. The guy had like 4 minutes on the clock, and Gukesh was still playing quickly. Like everybody in the world is always like, Gukesh plays too slow. Gukesh does well in long time control. Gukesh was putting the strongest player in the world in time pressure. And then he did found Queen to H3, which was the best move in the position. Are you guys looking on the evaluation bar or Magnus played king takes f3. Look on the king. That's what will happen to your king if you don't castle your king. And then after this, Gukesh just played knight to c4. The knight is coming in. This rook is coming in. Rook to a5 was played. Like Magnus plays rook to a5. The knight is able to take. Like he was not happy with this move at all. And then from here, Gukesh is just like, okay, you're giving me material. I'm gonna take material. I'm not even gonna try to checkmate your king. So Gukesh is like, okay, takes. Let's give a check. That was a mistake. The computer wanted him to just play rook to 8 and go for the king, but Gukesh was like, I'm winning the game. Let me get the material. Knight, all the pieces are now coming in the attack. Queen to d7 was played. Gukesh plays knight to e3. Now there's a checkmate threat being happened on g2. And then after Magnus played rook to d2, Queen c1 check was played. And then after king f2, knight g4 check. And Magnus is not able to take on g4 because he's going to lose this rook on d2. So he plays king to e2, knight e4 hits the queen. The queen moves, we take, boom, rook takes, and then Magnus Carlsen just resigned in this position. I actually played a game against Hikaru. If you want to watch that game, just click on this video.